Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. I'm Dr. Carmen Imes, Associate Professor of Old Testament at Biola University, and I'm excited to have you join me. If you're new to my channel, I would recommend that you go back and start with the beginning of the Exodus playlist, and you'll see that I have actually more than 100 videos trekking through Exodus little by little in roughly 10-minute chunks of time. Today we're picking things up in Exodus 23 verses 24 to 33. This is a bigger chunk of text, but it all hangs together and we need to talk about it all at once. As I read today, I want to give you some starting instructions for what to listen for. People often struggle with the apparent violence of the Old Testament, and one of the number one questions that I get from people who are wrestling with the Old Testament is, why did God command the Israelites to wipe out the Canaanites? This sounds like genocide. We don't like it, and so it feels objectionable. It feels like, how could I possibly entrust my life to someone who is bent on the destruction of another people group? So when I'm reading, as I'm reading this section of Exodus 23, I want you to, in particular, listen for blood. Listen to the place where the Israelites are being told to wipe out the Canaanites. I'm going to actually read verse 23 just to kind of give us a running start. I'm reading from my translation of the Hebrew. It says, "My angel will go before you, and he will bring you to the Amorite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Canaanite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, and I will make them disappear." Now, we talked about that verse last week, picking it up in verse 24. "Do not bow down to their gods, and do not serve them. Do not do according to their deeds, but you must surely tear them down, and must surely smash their stone monuments. You must serve Yahweh your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I will take away sickness from your midst. There will not be one miscarrying or barren in your land. The number of your days I will fulfill. The terror of me I will send before you. I will bring into confusion all the people to whom you will come. I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you. I will send hornets before you, and they will drive out the Hivite, the Canaanite, and the Hittite from before you. I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become deserted, and the beasts of the field become numerous against you. Little by little I will drive them out from before you, until you are fruitful and inherit the land. I will set your border from the Sea of Reeds as far as the Sea of the Philistines, and from the desert until the river. For I will give into your hand those dwelling in the land, and you will drive them out before you. Do not make a covenant with them or with their gods. They must not dwell in your land, lest they cause you to sin against me. For if you worship their gods, it will become a trap for you." Okay, I asked you to listen for blood, and I hope you noticed that nowhere in this passage are they told to kill the Canaanites. Now, this is not the only passage where God gives instructions to the people who are entering the land. So for a fuller discussion of this, we need to also look at Deuteronomy 7 and Deuteronomy 12. But even in those passages, what's clear is that the nations are off limits for the Israelites to make covenants with or to join in worship. What's much less clear is whether they are to be killed. The greatest danger was not intermingling of blood. They're not being told not to intermarry because God is concerned about the purity of Jewish blood. There are already lots of foreigners who've married into the Israelite family at this point. The greatest danger is rather the assimilation to the worship practices of the residents of the land. The primary mandate that we read here and in Deuteronomy 7 and 12 was to destroy the implements of false worship and drive away the people to live elsewhere. And even the driving away, God says he will do himself. There are two pairs of emphatic verbs. We've talked about emphatic verbs before in chapter 22, verse 22, where God gives strong instructions to look out for the vulnerable. Here, the emphatic verbs, the doubled verbs, are to tear down, and to smash, smash. So again, notice what they are to tear down and to smash, and you'll notice they are not people. They're supposed to tear down the gods, that is the idols that have been set up inside the land, and must surely smash, that is smash, their stone monuments. Why? Because these idols and monuments are dedicated to the worship of false gods. These represented the people's allegiance to these other gods in hopes of fertility. Why do people worship other gods? Because they hope that these gods will provide rain to make their crops grow. They hope they'll provide fertility for their flocks and their herds and for their wives. And so to smash the altars and the idols and the monuments is to eliminate these false gods' claim on the land. This land belongs to Yahweh. Therefore, the target of the conquest is not people, but implements of worship. Now, to eliminate the gods of the land could make folks nervous about their own survivability. Because, as I said, they worship the gods of whatever particular place in hopes of experiencing prosperity and fertility. So in this passage, we hear that Yahweh takes responsibility for fruitful crops and herds and wives. He is going to be the one to supply grain and water. They don't need to worship Baal or Asherah or any of the other gods that the people of the land are worshiping. Now, in the passage, it says that God will bless their bread and their water. Bread is usually a generic word for food. Any of the food that sustains you can be summarized as bread. And that God will take away sickness. There won't be one miscarrying or barren. Now, does this mean that if you miscarry, it's a sign of God's judgment? I sure hope not, because many, many, many women today have miscarriages, including me. I lost my first child 25 years ago to miscarriage. And I don't believe that was a sign of God's judgment. This passage is targeted specifically for this generation of people who've come out of Egypt, met God at Mount Sinai, and are headed to the promised land. While the loss of fruitfulness is among those consequences of covenant unfaithfulness, prosperity or its opposite cannot function as a diagnostic tool. We can't look at someone and say, wow, they're really flourishing. Now we know that they're in the will of God. We can all think of wicked people who are flourishing. Neither can we say, oh, this person's fallen on hard times. I guess they did something to anger Yahweh. Remember the book of Job? In the book of Job, it's very clear that Job did nothing to deserve the calamity that came upon him. The calamity was outside the realm of his fault. Many faithful people in Scripture struggled with infertility, and many people today struggle with infertility or loss of children. If you have lost a child or you've been unable to get pregnant, that is not an indication that God is angry with you or that you have sinned. Again, this passage is specifically directed to the generation that is going into the land. They have the particular temptation that they might want to worship the gods of the land in order to achieve fertility. And God says, hey, destroy those idols. I've got you. I've got your back. Now, in verses 27 to 30, we see God take primary responsibility for clearing the land. He's going to send terror or fear ahead of them. The people are going to be so afraid when they hear the Israelites are coming that they're just going to hightail it out of there. We can see this in Joshua 2, verse 9, when Rahab, a Canaanite, speaks to a couple of spies who come check out her city, Jericho. And she says, I know that the fear of God has fallen on all of us and everyone's afraid. So that is the primary method of clearing the land. God says he's also going to cause confusion. In Hebrew, this is the word hamoti, and it has in a couple of ancient versions, the Syriac and the Vulgate, been mistranslated as kill, that God will kill them rather than God will cause their confusion. Hamoti sounds like hemati. It has different vowels. And so a couple of ancient versions misread that. However, I think confusion is the better reading here. Now, I translated it that they will turn their back and run. In Hebrew, it's actually the back of their neck. So the proper idiom in the Hebrew language for fleeing is not to turn your back, but to turn your neck and run. So you're going to see the backs of their necks because they are going to be running for their lives. One of the most mysterious parts of this passage is the hornet that God says he will send ahead of them to drive out the inhabitants of the land. A hornet in Hebrew is a tzirah. There have been a lot of different proposals for what this could possibly mean. Is this a metaphor for an army or particular king? Is it a mistranslation and we just need to find the right cognate or cousin word to give us a different meaning for it? Is it functioning metonymically or as metonymy for panic? Does this really represent panic? The Arabic word for hornet is often used to denote panic resulting in mass flight. So perhaps that's what's going on here. Or some have suggested the hornet represents Lower Egypt. On Egyptian monuments, there's often two figures that represent Upper and Lower Egypt, and there's different symbols representing both. There's a variety of plant symbols, animal symbols, deities that represent the two parts of Egypt. So the stinging insect represents Lower Egypt. Could that be an indication that here God's going to use an Egyptian army to drive them out? These have all been proposals that I've read about and heard other people suggest. I'm not entirely persuaded by any of them. I wonder if part of the point is its mystery. That if you were watching someone off in the distance and they were being chased by hornets, you wouldn't be able to see the hornet. You would just be able to see them freaking out and running across the lawn, to get away from the hornet. And so I wonder if God uses this image of a hornet because from a distance, no one will be able to tell why these people are leaving. They're just going to feel so compelled to leave that they're going to just hightail it out of there. And so maybe the point is that we're not supposed to know what made them leave. The end result is going to be an extensive land where God will rule from sea to sea and from desert to river. The phrase seems to be co-opting a Canaanite myth that indicated the extent of Canaanite territory. It may also reflect the extent of Egypt's territory under Pharaoh Thutmose III. And so it could say, Egypt has owned this land, and now what belonged to Egypt or what belonged to Canaan is now going to belong to Yahweh. Either way, the point is that there will be a gradual displacement until the full extent of the land belongs to Yahweh. The Israelites are not supposed to offer any amnesty for the enemy because apostasy is a real threat. It's absolutely essential that the Israelites continue to walk faithfully with Yahweh, worshiping him alone, and any tolerance for other nations living among them who worship other gods would represent a potential threat. So that brings us to the end of this passage. There's so much more that we could say about it, and so much more we could say about the Canaanites, but we're out of time in this video. Here's what I want to leave you with. I think this, along with other difficulties in the Old Testament, belong in our basket of questions. These do not have to be a barrier that prevents us from moving forward in our faith journey. The Bible has so much to offer us about who God is and how he works in the world. And the clearer passages should always shape the way we read the more mysterious or difficult passages. And so when I come to this passage, I come already knowing the kind of God that the Bible portrays to us as gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in love, who does not leave the guilty unpunished. I know him to be a just God and a good God and a God who can be trusted. And I know this not just from reading the pages of Scripture, but from walking with him for the past 45 plus years of my life. And so for me, when I come to a difficult passage, I add that to my basket of questions and I carry it with me as I walk forward in faith, not silencing my questions, not trying to sugarcoat them or paper them over, but saying, I think God can handle my questions, and I haven't found anywhere else I would rather turn. And so, although I don't know exactly what to do with this, and although it doesn't totally sit well with me, I have the faith right now to keep walking forward. And so that's what I would encourage for you if you have wrestled with this passage. Again, much more we could say. This isn't the end of an explanation of what to do about the Canaanites, but it's what I can say tied to this passage in Exodus. I hope it's been helpful to you. Have a great week.